Let's continue on here with our 32 teams in 24 shows. I'm just going to change however many shows we end up doing this in. Whenever we talk here about, let's start out with the Buffalo Bills. Kelley.
32 teams, 32 shows, question mark. Buffalo Bills edition.
Now that Roberto Moreno is over here, now he can fix this graphic and he can make the 32 explode as well. like have him make the 32 explode.
And just into a question mark?
Yeah, it's like 32 teams in 32 shows, and then it goes, and then
of
just a
the
question.
3 and the 2 just clash,
yeah.
Meet in the middle, and then question mark emerges.
Buffalo Bills, one of your very, 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 very short shots to win the whole thing. It is 11-6 team last year. Won the AFC East, second straight season, lost to the Chiefs 42-36 in that awesome divisional game. If we take a look here, Sean McDermott comes back as head coach. Now the offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, now there for the Buffalo Bills, promoted from the passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach. As we know, Brian Daboll is out of town. So Ken Dorsey takes over as offensive coordinator. Leslie Frazier in his 6th season as the defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. Now, Wes, this was a very active team in free agency, and it is one of the bigger pickups in Von Miller heading to Buffalo. So Von Miller is in, Roger Saffold, right guard, is in, Jordan Phillips at linebacker is in. Of course, we know that Mitch Trubisky's out of town, so they had to bring in a backup. This team's too good to not have a solid backup, so they bring in Case Keenum just in case Josh Allen gets nicked up and has to miss a couple of games. They bring in Jamison Crowder because they are out on Cole Beasley there in the slot. Jamison Crowder, an awesome slot receiver when he's been healthy. So we shall see if he can continue to be healthy. Defensive tackle DeQuan Jones, a huge signing for them as well. They brought in right guard Greg Van Roten for depth. That offensive line is pretty packed as it is, but Van Roten provides them some pretty good depth. O.J. Howard in town, Duke Johnson in town as well. And when I say very active, they also lost a lot of guys. So a lot of these guys are just replacing guys that are no longer on the roster here. Jerry Hughes is gone. Cole Beasley is gone. Mario Addison is gone. Star Lutulele is gone. Emmanuel Sanders is gone. Harrison Phillips, Levi Wallace, Mitch Trubisky, A.J. Klein. So all those guys out of town. But Wes, I mean, you see what they did in free agency, and it was like a 1-for-1 trade on everything.
Yeah.
They went for everything they lost. You lose a Star Lutulele, and then you get DeQuan Jones. You lose Cole Beasley, you sign Jamison Crowder. So it was kind of a 1-for-1, and you lose an edge rusher in Jerry Hughes, but you bring in Von Miller. So you look at the roster, and it's like, I mean, it's as good as it was last year, even though it's not going to be exactly the same.
Yeah, the talent is still there.
Yeah.
By the way, from the draft standpoint, Elam, the corner out of Florida, and then we already mentioned a player earlier, James Cook, who they got in the second round from the University of Georgia. He's going to battle Devin Singletary probably for carries and may end up being the starter, I think, on that team. But look, I like the addition. I like the addition of Saffold there at left guard, obviously Von Miller. They wanted somebody really on that front four can make plays. You still got Boogie Basham out of Wake Forest, and you still got Ed Oliver, who's another first-round pick. So they haven't really become the playmakers, though, that I think they were drafted to be. So they went out and got Von Miller. We know this is a team, pretty solid secondary, especially with turnovers and tackling, led by Micah Hyde there at free safety. So the talent is all there. I know they lost Brian Daboll, but the new offensive coordinator, I think they're going to be fine in that regard. The OC, by the way, Ken Dorsey gets promoted. Joe Brady, if you're wondering what happened to him, because we talked about Carolina over the last couple of days when he got let go as offensive coordinator. He is the quarterback's coach here for Josh Allen. So I think a pretty good coach for Allen and his continued development.
You would definitely think so. In the 3rd round, they took a linebacker in Terrell Bernard. In the 5th round, took a wide receiver, Khalil Shakir. And then in the 6th round, I had to write this down. Why would I talk about a 6th rounder? This is for you, Kelley Bydlon. In the 6th round, Buffalo Bills took the punt god.
Yeah, he did. Matt Arise.
And he wasn't the first punter, by the way, to go in the draft.
Yeah, the 3rd punter.
Oh, I would have lost so much money on that prop if it was listed here in Vegas.
The 3rd punter to go. And here's the thing. So I go down the rabbit hole with this today because I'm like, oh, he ended up in Buffalo. I'd forgotten that he ended up in Buffalo. And then I read, there was a whole article written on why he was the third punter as opposed to the first punter. And what happens is, and it was one of those deals like we kind of speculated on, is they talked to a couple of the GMs and he outkicks his coverage too much. Like he outkicks the coverage too much.
That is crazy. That is
so
wild.
there were concerns that, when you're punting it 65, 70 yards downfield, you're giving these returners, who, by the way, they're NFL returners, they're awesome, you're giving them way too much time.
Well, he had to kick so far at San Diego State because that team couldn't move the frickin' ball. So it's like, we got to get them down as deep as possible so we can get some, the defense can get them 3 and out, because that defense for the Aztecs and Brady Hoke was pretty good. So it's like, okay, we got to score from the opponent's 40 instead of being on the other side of the 50.
I guess I'm just thinking out loud on this one, but is that not something? I don't want to minimize all the work that goes into your punting techniques and everything, but is that not something that he could just create more hang time on? You know what I mean?
But that's the thing, though. His style of punting, he had gotten really good at kicking more of a longer line drive, right? And so that was the concern. Now, the Bills think that they could, and I don't know, I haven't heard any. The article didn't go into how he's progressing. It was just why he was why he was the third punter taken. But it did go to explain that they were not concerned that they couldn't teach him how to get more hang time on his kicks or something. But there was concern with these other teams, and that was the reason why that he went third overall.
Well,
and I was
we'll see who's laughing at the end when his hang time's 9 seconds or something.
The quote actually in the article was, apparently he's incredibly competitive, and he is pulling the whole, I'm going to make these teams pay that passed on me.
Remember we were reading before the draft that he was he kept saying things to scouts in front offices about fine, you can draft me as a punter, but I'm going to come in and take your field goal kicker's job too within a couple of years. He kept saying stuff like that. So unbelievably confident. Let's go Batterize.
It's like an NBA guy when he's supposed to go 4 and he goes 6. I'm going to make all these teams pay for passing on me.
Yeah, so I was a third punter. I'll show you. I should have been the first punter. According to Football Outsiders, this team last year, the number 2 overall team DVOA in all of football. They had the number 10 offense, the number 1 defense, and the only reason that they come in at number 2 overall is because 19th in special teams. Well, that could all change now that they have the punt god. So
they're going to be top 10 guaranteed.
Yes. So this could be the number 1 overall team in all of football according to these advanced metrics by the time it's all said and done. Warren Sharp has this as the 15th toughest schedule, so about middle of the pack, obviously, for this team. A lot of that has to do with the fact that maybe there's going to be, the Dolphins win totals up at 9, Patriots win totals up at 8.5. So, the way Warren does this, it's based off of win total projections. And so 15th toughest schedule for them. He has them projected. You can see the win total on your screen right now is at 11.5. He has them projected at 11.65 wins on the season. So again, one of those no value, at least if you want to go with his projections on this. We'll see how this roster all breaks down and see if there's any numbers on this team that we think is bettable. If there's any alt numbers maybe that we want to take a look at, whatever it might be. But again, one of the very best teams, at least on paper here, as we head into the 2022 season. Buffalo Bills coming back. Heading back to our 32 teams in 23 shows, Buffalo Bills edition here. No surprise, we just read off all of the free agent moves that they did, of course, coming without all that returning talent as well. They have the number 1 rated roster heading into 2022, according to ESPN and Pro Football Focus. The offensive line might be the only unit that isn't a standout unit. It does maybe have a little bit of upside if some of these guys can kind of take any sort of step forward. Deion Dawkins at left tackle, Roger Saffold probably going to slot in at left guard, Mitch Morse there at center, Ryan Bates at right guard, and then Spencer Brown at right tackle. Now, Wes, all these guys they're all solid. None of them are real standout.
There are no all-pros on that unit.
They're all solid. None of these guys are really super standout. So if there was anything to nitpick at all about this team, maybe it would be that offensive line because, again, it's basically the only unit on this entire team that doesn't have, like we're talking about, the huge standout, the guy that is like, oh, jaw-dropping guy. You got that at quarterback. You got it on the defensive line. You have it at receiver. You have all that stuff.
Tight end,
but you just don't have it there for the offensive line.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's gonna make this team if they are gonna in fact get to a Super Bowl, because we know that they're right there.
Right,
they're right there on the precipice. But the defensive line's got to be a little bit better. The talent is there because don't forget they got Gregory Rousseau, who was a first-round pick out of Miami. You have Boogie Basham from Wake Forest, who put up big numbers. Adding Von Miller, you have Ed Oliver in the middle. You also have Epinesa, who is a second-round pick out of Iowa. So the talent is there in that front seven, but you'd like to see them. They kind of leave you wanting something more, I think, Matt. You want to see them, make more plays, even though the defensive numbers, and I think a lot of that was a byproduct of an easier schedule last year, but first in points allowed, first in yards allowed. But it feels like in the big moments, they don't get to the quarterback enough, and we certainly saw that in that playoff game against Kansas City.
There's, to play devil's advocate here, we had one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, maybe in NFL history last year with Cincinnati, and then make it to the Super Bowl, right? And so to play devil's advocate, if you have a quarterback that is sharp, and it looks like Josh Allen is sharp these days, right? Maybe he understands, okay, get the ball out a little bit quicker. Maybe he runs a little bit more. That also is a bonus of having a Josh Allen as well, because if the ends end up collapsing and then he sees that hole up the middle, he's just going to take off. He's going to go take the 7, 8, 9 yards. We've seen him do it multiple different times. So I'm not saying that this is a huge wart on this team by any stretch, but I will say that if there's anything, maybe we're pointing at come January and we're looking at this team coming down the stretch. Maybe this is one of the reasons why we don't like them in the Super Bowl or whatever, because of this offensive line. I mean, pass catching group, 8th ranked overall heading into 2022. Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Jamison Crowder, Dawson Knox. That is a really good receiving core. What we saw with Gabriel Davis last year, Wes, was, listen, he was kind of pressed into additional workload because Emmanuel Sanders was out so often, right? Either injury, had COVID a couple of different times as well. And when he was out there, Gabriel Davis actually ended up securing that starting job because he was awesome whenever he was out there. And so actually one of the higher rated players, according to Pro Football Focus, at the wide receiver position last year, even though it was kind of some limited snaps for him, but he steps in, going to be the true starter on the other side of Steph Diggs, and then Jamison Crowder in the slot, and Dawson Knox there at tight end. I mean, this is with you combine that with Josh Allen, and we're talking about the running back being pretty deep for them as well. This offense is certainly not going to lack firepower.
No, they've got some depth too, and they've got Kumaro to be there in the slot. They do add Tavon Austin. We'll see what he has left, but certainly has a lot of experience. Did play 13 games last year for the Jaguars, so they get him as kind of a backup in free agency. But this is a deep receiving core for sure.
And then you mentioned the defensive line. I mean, listen, it's one of those defensive lines here with the addition of Von Miller. They signed the Daquan Jones as well. And as you mentioned, if Greg Rousseau can kind of, again, these guys are young. Rousseau's young. There is definitely still some upside that could be had there for him. Maybe he doesn't ever live up to it. Maybe he wasn't as good as everyone thought when he was coming out of college. That being said, we haven't seen all we can see of this guy yet. So if he takes a step up, now you're talking about, honestly, one of the better defensive lines, out
like
there.
I was saying, the talent is absolutely there. It's just got to produce the results. But
and they just got to get some pressure because they just got to get some pressure here because, listen, this defense with that secondary as well, if they can get some pressure with this secondary that they have, it's going to be a monster of a defense because you got Trey White coming back at corner. As you mentioned, they draft Kaiir Elam, who's going to have to start for them. But you got Teron Johnson in the nickel, and then you have Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde at safety. This secondary is at least a top 5 secondary. And if Trey White plays anywhere close to he played before this injury, it could be a top 2 or 3 secondary.
And what were they, 3rd in takeaways last year? Usually, more so maybe in college than in the NFL, you always look for that turnovers equals turnaround, either on the positive side, positive regression, or if you got a lot of them the previous year, it tends to regress the next year. NFL, it kind of tends to stay within the range at least. So I don't think that there's going to be that much drop-off in forcing turnovers.
If we take a look at this Buffalo schedule, again, this is a team that it's one of the shorter shots to win the whole thing. If you take a look, it's not, even though the schedule certainly gets easier in the second half, it's not a team that I would recommend saying wait and see on, because they might win all these games at the beginning of the year as well.
Exactly, because you look, that first quadrant there, that's the toughest part of the schedule. You open up with the Super Bowl champions, so that's that old ring and banner night angle if you want to go against the Rams, depending on if you want to do that. You get Tennessee at home. They've had a little bit of kind of an underrated rivalry in the regular season over the last few years and have had close games. Then you go back-to-back at Miami and Baltimore, Steelers at home and at the Chiefs. I can't see, even with that being so tough, I can't see them worse than 4-2 in those first 6 games.
And so that's why, some of these strategies, Kelley, that we talk about is, okay, you know what? Let this first 5-game stretch play out, or let this first 6-game stretch play out, and then come in if you're bullish on this team and then take a bet. The problem with the Bills is, that's tough, but they might win all these games. I mean, I mean, they might win all these games, and so it's, you certainly can't then take them on the back half where the schedule gets so much easier with the Jets, the Lions, the Jets again, the Dolphins, the Bears, the Patriots, who we think, I personally think we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, but I think is in for maybe a rough season as well. So. That's the tough thing about the Bills. They're the short shot. They're the short shot for a reason, and there's not even in my opinion, I don't think there's an angle as to how to play them other than like, hey, I'm bullish on them, and I'm just going to have a ticket in my account, and that's just all that's all I can do.
Matt, I haven't bet anything yet, but I have a feeling I'm going to end up playing over their win total or over their alt win total, even maybe. Because again, we talked about it a little bit last night. I'm just not completely sold on this Patriots or Dolphins team. I think the Bills are as good as it gets probably in the NFL right now. I think there's a lot of these other AFC teams, especially in the AFC West, we think can be really good, but the Bills have now proven it to me after last year, and I think they're great. So, I mean, I think if you're just looking at DraftKings stuff right now, over 11.5 is their win total, but it's juiced up to -140, I think is what I just saw. Over 12.5 at +175. I'd rather play the variance and go over the 12.5.
The 13-4 is certainly within the range of outcomes for this team.
And I like the fact that they went through the pain last year, that painful loss in Kansas City that was basically a coin flip. So, that makes a team kind of a mission team and a real motivated team. I think this team's ready for some greatness this year.
One of the short shots, and for a reason, no doubt about it, 6-1 to win the whole thing for the Buffalo Bills.
Visit VSiN.com to get current odds, listen for free, find showtimes, and download VSiN sports betting podcasts.